The first sound that broke the silence that Friday night wasn't the clinking of wine glasses, but the sharp clang of a fork hitting the floor, followed by a heavy stillness that swept through the dining room. Amid the warm golden glow of the Olive Street restaurant, an elderly woman was moving her hands, her eyes filled with confusion. No one seemed to understand what she was trying to say. The waitstaff stood frozen, glancing at each other like puppets with their strings cut. And then from the farthest corner, Maya Brooks stepped forward, small, quiet, needing no introduction. She approached the VIP table with a water pitcher in hand, set it down, and began to sign, precise, fluent, effortless, as natural as breathing. Her fingers danced through the air, and within seconds the elderly woman's face softened. Her eyes lit up with relief. Everyone around stood speechless. Even the man sitting next to her, tall, clad in a charcoal gray suit, a face carved with authority, stopped chewing and stared at the waitress as if he'd just witnessed the impossible. The elderly woman smiled, reached for Maya's hand, and signed something with both of hers. Maya responded, a gentle smile curving her lips. That moment, two women, one old, one young, speaking a language without sound, was so quietly beautiful that it seemed to breathe life into the air itself. As for the man, he said nothing, but in his eyes there was something, a flicker of curiosity, a silent jolt. The Olive Street, a place where a single wristwatch could cost more than Maya's monthly paycheck. An upscale Italian restaurant in the heart of the financial district, where people in tailored suits sipped $1,000 wine while plotting corporate takeovers. And then there was Maya. 26 years old, a girl almost invisible to everyone except for those eyes, calm but not empty, as if an ocean of stories were quietly hidden within. She had never sought attention, never laughed too loud, never complained, never joined in the breakroom gossip. When someone yelled, Maya simply lowered her head and smiled. When a customer grew irritable, she apologized so softly that half the time, no one even heard her. But tonight was different. Her simple act with the deaf woman had pulled every gaze toward her. Toward the girl everyone thought only knew how to wipe tables and carry menus. The powerful man, whom she would later learn was named Sebastian Hale, sat in silence for a long while before leaning toward his mother, who was still signing rapidly with Maya. She couldn't hear their words, but she could feel his gaze. That kind of look successful men reserve for someone who's managed to surprise them, studying her every quiet movement. After that evening, the kitchen buzzed non-stop with whispers. She knows sign language? Didn't expect that from her. Bet she learned it somewhere fancy. Maya just smiled and kept clearing tables, as if none of it had anything to do with her. But inside, her heart was beating faster than it had in years. For the first time in so long, she had used that language again, the one that had once been her only bridge to the person she loved most in the world. The one she never got the chance to say goodbye to. The neon lights reflected off the glass table, scattering cold streaks of light. Maya's fingers brushed over a lingering drop of water, her gaze distant. She knew that moment, the instant she'd unknowingly revealed a piece of her buried past, had opened something that could never be undone. From now on, she could no longer just be the ordinary waitress. The night drew to a close. Most of the guests had already left when Maya stood in the kitchen untying her apron. Then, in the reflection of the glass door, she saw a shadow. It was him, Sebastian Hale. He walked toward her, the cool detachment from earlier, now replaced by something quieter. His voice was low, deliberate. "Where did you learn sign language?" Maya looked up, her eyes steady, not avoiding, not searching. "In a place where words weren't enough," she said softly. The answer silenced him. For a brief moment, he seemed unsure how to respond. Then he nodded once and turned to leave. Just before the door closed, Maya heard Eleanor's hand signing from behind him. "Good night, dear." She smiled and signed back, "Sleep well." Late at night, Maya stepped out onto the street, the cold wind tossing her hair. The glass towers around her mirrored her small figure against a sea of city lights. This city was so loud that no one really heard anyone anymore. But somewhere, in a quiet corner of all that glitter and noise, a deaf woman had just felt heard, thanks to a girl who had always chosen silence. When someone chooses silence, it's not because they have nothing to say. It's because the world once refused to listen. The next morning, Maya went about clearing tables as usual, but every pair of eyes in the restaurant seemed to follow her. Rumors spread faster than breath. Everyone now knew she was the waitress who spoke with her hands to the mother of last night's special guest. Maya stayed silent, polishing a glass, trying to push away the image of that man's gaze. One that seemed both curious and searching for something even he didn't fully understand. Sebastian Hale. A name spoken with reverence. 33 years old, founder of a biomedical tech company valued in the hundreds of millions. A man who had once stood on stage at major conferences and declared the line that made him famous, "Intellect got me here, not emotion." Maya had read that quote in an article once. Now, recalling it, she found it almost ironic. Because in that fleeting moment, when he watched his mother smile at Maya through sign language, his eyes had held far too much emotion for a man who claimed to feel none. Eleanor Hale. That woman lingered in Maya's mind more than anyone else. Deaf since an accident years ago, back when Maya was still in college, Eleanor carried an air of calm elegance, poised but never cold. When Maya signed with her, Eleanor's eyes lit up, as if someone had finally heard the quiet voice she'd been speaking all along. Maya remembered that moment vividly. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it made her heart ache, like someone had gently touched a wound she'd spent years trying to hide. That night, after the guests had gone and the restaurant was nearly empty, Maya heard footsteps pause behind her. She turned, and there was Sebastian, fastening one button on his coat, the other hand in his pocket, his gaze steady but not cold. "Who did you learn sign language for?" he asked. It was a simple question, but his tone carried something else. Not curiosity, but the weight of someone who'd lost something once and was quietly reaching for it again. Maya hesitated for a heartbeat, her pulse quickening, then answered softly, almost like a confession. "For the person I never got the chance to say goodbye to." No one said another word. The only sound was the ticking of the clock in the kitchen. Sebastian gave a slight nod, his eyes softening for a brief moment. In that instant, between two strangers, an invisible thread was quietly tied together, woven from pain. From that day on, Sebastian began to appear more often. He never called ahead for a reservation. He simply showed up, always choosing the same table, always with his mother. Each time, Eleanor would look around for Maya, and Maya would always try to avoid Sebastian's gaze. But inevitably, she would smile, approach, and sign a greeting to Eleanor. A strange rhythm began to form between them. Eleanor signing stories about her summer garden, Maya laughing and responding with graceful movements, and Sebastian sitting in silence, listening with his eyes. One evening, Eleanor held Maya's hand for a long moment and signed, "Thank you for listening to me. So few people do anymore." Maya gently squeezed her hand and smiled. Sebastian watched them, and in that brief, unguarded second, something inside him, something that had long been hardened by work, money, and reputation, began to stir again. Evenings like those soon became a quiet ritual for the three of them. Maya's coworkers began whispering, "He's totally into her." "Girl, men like that only bring trouble." Maya just smiled faintly. She knew men like Sebastian. They didn't belong to her world. What she'd once had and lost had taught her one thing: every beautiful thing comes with a price. And yet, every time Sebastian walked through the restaurant doors, her heart gave the slightest tremor. Not because of his power or prestige, but because of that look that reminded her of a part of herself she thought had long since died. In the silence between them, she understood something. Some encounters aren't accidents. They're sent to us as reminders that sometimes, to find yourself again, you have to face the person who sees you most clearly. Saturday night. The restaurant lights were already off. Maya had just untied her apron when the hostess handed her an envelope. "Someone left this for you. No name." Maya looked at it, blank except for a small slanted scrawl near the seal. "For you." Inside, a photograph slipped out. Her, in a black suit, hair neatly tied back, holding a graduation certificate. Beside her stood a man, smiling, but with eyes that were cold. On the back, written in messy ballpoint pen, were 5 words that made her breath catch. "So you're still alive." Maya's throat tightened. She gripped the photo so hard the paper crumpled at the edges. The air around her seemed to thicken. Memories she thought were long buried came rushing back. The blinding light of a laboratory, the sharp scent of chemicals, the sound of a hand slamming down on a table, and a man's voice, cold as steel. "I won't let you destroy what I built." Maya Brooks wasn't her real name. She used to be Lena Moore, a researcher in applied linguistics. 3 years ago, she was one of the rising stars in her field, funded to develop a program that could translate sign language into spoken words, a project meant to bridge the gap for the deaf community. It was hailed as revolutionary. Until one night, everything collapsed. The man in the photo, Aaron Cade, had once been her lover and her partner in research. He was the one who took everything, their data, their findings, their dream, and submitted it under his own name. Then he accused her of fraud. She lost everything. Her reputation, her career, her future. No one believed her. The headlines screamed, "Young researcher caught in medical data scandal." She left the city, changed her name, erased every trace of who she had been. And she chose silence as punishment for trusting the wrong person. That night, Maya sat alone in her small apartment, the yellow light casting a weary hue across her pale face. The photo lay open on the table, half folded, half forgotten. She couldn't stop asking herself why it had resurfaced now. Who sent it? Or someone else? The old fear and guilt crept back like a ghost she'd never really exorcised. The next day, when Sebastian walked into the restaurant with his mother, Maya felt her heart stutter. He was speaking with the manager. Tall, composed, confidence radiating from every movement, his watch gleaming under the lights. He belonged to the same world Aaron did, the world of ambition, money, and prestige. As she watched him, something inside her shifted. Maybe fate was testing her again, and she couldn't tell whether Sebastian Hale was meant to be her second chance or just another trap sent to measure how much she still dared to trust. That evening, after most of the guests had left, Eleanor lingered. She signed, inviting Maya to sit with her. The two of them settled in a quiet corner by the window, its glass fogged by the cool night air. Maya smiled faintly and signed, "You look tired today." Eleanor replied, "Old age, but you don't look much better, dear." The signed words made Maya laugh softly, then her gaze dimmed. Slowly, she signed, "There are things you can't ever get back, no matter how much you want to." Eleanor studied her for a long moment. She didn't ask why. Instead, she signed with calm, deliberate grace, but kindness always finds its way back. Maya's hands froze midair. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. Such simple words, yet impossible to forget. She looked at Eleanor and realized the deaf woman before her could hear more than most of the people who had ever filled her life with noise. As Maya walked Eleanor to the car, she stood beneath the streetlight, watching the sleek vehicle pull away slowly. In the rearview mirror, Sebastian turned his head. Their eyes met. No words, just a fleeting moment. But it was enough to make Maya's chest tighten. He would probably never understand it, but in that brief exchange, she realized something. They were both living in the same kind of silence. He hid from his emotions behind reason. She hid from her memories behind work. Later that night, Maya sat by her small window, watching the dots of light flicker from the building across the street. Eleanor's words echoed in her mind. Kindness always finds its way back. The phrase blended with the sound of the wind. She wondered if she could really believe it, after the world had once taken everything from her with a single accusation. But then she thought of Eleanor's smile, Sebastian's eyes, and the warmth of that moment when the older woman's hands had held hers. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something left worth believing in. Not everyone who's lost everything is a loser. Some people, like her, are simply learning how to stand again, this time without hurting anyone else. Nearly 2 weeks after that evening with Eleanor, Maya received an invitation from Sebastian. A luxurious card, embossed with gold lettering, charity gala for the deaf community and evening of hope. He wanted her to attend, with him and his mother. Maya read the message over and over along with Eleanor's note. "You'll come, won't you? I want you there." She hesitated, torn between old fear and the quiet respect she felt for the woman who had made her feel seen again. In the end, she said yes. Not for the gala, not for Sebastian, but for Eleanor, the woman who had helped her remember her own worth. On the night of the event, Maya slipped into a simple deep blue dress. She tied her hair herself, looked into the mirror, and tried to believe it would just be an ordinary evening. But when Sebastian's car stopped in front of the Grand Hotel, her heart clenched. The crowd in glittering gowns and tailored suits flowed into the ballroom beneath crystal chandeliers that sparkled like a sky of stars. Eleanor reached for her hand, smiling reassuringly. She signed slowly, "You look beautiful." Maya gave a small smile in return. "I'm just trying not to look scared," she signed back. Soft music drifted through the ballroom. Men in tuxedos, women in glittering gowns, wine swirling in crystal glasses. Maya stayed near the edge of the room, letting Sebastian work the crowd, smooth, composed, perfectly in control. She watched him and felt a strange distance. This world, the galas, the speeches, the handshakes that cost more than promises, it had once been hers too. Now she was only an outsider looking in. Until her eyes caught a face she knew. Her body froze. Even across the room, surrounded by laughter and champagne, she recognized him instantly. Aaron Cade. The same confident stance. The same practiced smile. Only now sharper. The look of a man who'd learned to enjoy standing on top. Aaron turned, and their eyes met. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, just for a second, before it smoothed back into that polished charm. He walked toward her, a glass of wine in hand, his voice low and silken. "Well, what do you know? Small world, isn't it? I always figured you wouldn't have the nerve to show up again." Maya went still. Every sound around her seemed to fade. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, all swallowed by a heavy, ringing silence. Her fingers trembled against the stem of her champagne glass, tightening until it nearly slipped. She took a small step back, scanning the room. Across the hall, Sebastian was speaking with the event organizers, unaware. Aaron gave a faint, knowing smirk, his eyes flicking toward Sebastian before he leaned in, lowering his voice. "Funny thing," he murmured. "Hale and I, we're about to make history. You'll recognize the project, I think." The last words cut through her like a blade. She didn't need him to explain. She knew. The project he was talking about, it was hers. The data she had built, the sign language model he had stolen. And in that instant, under the glittering lights and the hum of polite laughter, Maya felt her world collapse. Again. She left the ballroom, moving quickly into the hallway. The air outside was sharp and cold, biting at her lungs. Her heart raced, breath stuttering. Eleanor noticed her almost instantly and followed. She couldn't hear, but when she saw Maya's pale face, she said nothing. Just pulled her close and held her. No words. And yet Maya felt it clearly. Some people can hear pain without needing a single sound. When Sebastian found them, Maya had already forced herself to breathe evenly again. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, avoiding his eyes, but when he placed a firm hand on her shoulder, his tone changed. Low, protective. "Who scared you?" Maya hesitated, then answered softly, almost in a whisper. "The man in there. He once taught me that silence can kill." Sebastian stood still. He didn't yet understand, but the look in her eyes told him everything words couldn't. Pain that was too real to be performed. That night, back home in his office, he sat before his computer, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes. Aaron Cade. The name wasn't unfamiliar. He was the man Sebastian had been negotiating with. A potential partner on a new AI communication project. A project the press was already calling the future of connection through technology. A vague sense of unease kept Sebastian awake that night. Something didn't sit right. He called his personal assistant, Thomas, and told him to dig. Everything on Aaron Cade. Academic records, past research, registered patents. Near dawn, a large file arrived in his inbox. Dozens of megabytes worth of documents. He opened it. Pages of technical diagrams, research notes, prototype sketches. And then, on page 17, a heading stopped him cold. Sign Voice, Adaptive Linguistic Interface, by Lena Moore and Aaron Cade. One of the names had been thickly blacked out, but when Sebastian adjusted the contrast on the scanned image, faint letters reappeared beneath the blur. Lena Moore. Sebastian leaned back in his chair, the bluish glow of the screen washing over his face. Maya Brooks. Lena Moore. The quiet waitress who had signed to make his mother laugh was the very same woman who had created the technology Aaron Cade was now selling to him. He didn't sleep at all that night. Sebastian read every page, the schematics, the AI linguistic models, the neural translation frameworks for sign language, and with each detail it became clearer. The mind behind this creation wasn't Aaron's, it was hers. The precision, the elegance of the algorithms, the handwriting in the margins, the same careful loops and compact notes he'd seen once on Maya's notepad when she took an order. By dawn, there was no doubt left. The real architect of Sign Voice was Maya. The next morning, he arrived at the Olive Street earlier than usual. The restaurant was still closed. Through the glass, he saw her inside, quietly setting the tables, the soft amber light brushing over her tousled hair. She didn't see him. Maya hung her apron on the hook, bent down to remove her worn flats. Every movement was deliberate, restrained, the kind of rhythm people learn when they're trying to exist without being noticed. Sebastian watched as she finally straightened, gazing across the empty restaurant. And in that moment, something shifted in her face. Not exhaustion, but resolve. He understood instantly. She wasn't just taking off her apron. She was shedding the last piece of disguise between her and the truth. He lifted a hand to the glass but didn't knock. Between them stood a transparent wall, thin as breath, yet as unbreakable as the distance between two worlds. One belonging to a man who had just uncovered something that could change everything, and the other to a woman whose past had finally caught up to her. In that dim light, the truth began to take shape. The man she was beginning to trust was the very one about to bring back into the world the thing that had once destroyed her, and he didn't even know it. The next day, Sebastian arrived at his company with a colder edge than usual. He waited in his office, the gray morning light slicing through the glass panels, illuminating the file he'd placed neatly on his desk. When Aaron walked in, the same confident smile, the same easy arrogance, Sebastian didn't bother with pleasantries. "I want to talk about Sign Voice," he said, his voice sharp as a blade. Aaron raised an eyebrow, unbothered. "It's progressing well. You should be proud. We're about to lead the industry." Sebastian pushed the file across the desk toward him. "I reviewed the original designs. One name was blacked out, Lena Moore. Who is she?" The air in the room grew so heavy it seemed even the ticking clock could be heard louder than breath. Aaron smirked. "A fraud," he said coolly. "She was prosecuted for stealing research data. I saved the project from being buried. I'm the one who brought it to life." Sebastian stared at him long enough for that smug smile to falter. "And you think I'll believe that?" Aaron's tone sharpened, his words like ice. "Believe it or not, that's your choice. But if you get involved with her, you'll lose everything. The press, the investors, no one's forgotten that scandal. Don't make the mistake of being the idealist." Sebastian said nothing. He watched Aaron leave, the door shutting with a quiet click that somehow felt too loud. He stood there for a long moment, then stepped into the hallway, drawing a deep breath, but the anger didn't fade. The sting of betrayal and doubt wrapped around his throat like a thin wire. When he reached the Olive Street, Maya was wiping down a table, her movements slow, steady, composed, the rhythm of someone used to surviving storms. She looked up and, in that instant, understood everything. "You know," she said softly. Sebastian nodded once. "I want to hear it from you." She was silent for a long moment, then disappeared into the small room in back. When she returned, she carried an old metal box, scratched and rusted. She opened the lid and set its contents on the table. Several paper designs, a few USB drives, a hard drive, and some ink-smudged notes. "For 3 years I've kept this as a living piece of evidence of the mistake I made, trusting the wrong person," Maya said softly. "I don't want revenge. I just want to stop being afraid when I hear his name." Sebastian flipped through the pages, the detailed notes, the sign language annotations, the algorithms. Everything matched Aaron's project exactly. He looked up. "I'll help you clear your name." She shook her head. "If you do that, you'll lose everything. He won't let it go. Your whole company could collapse." Sebastian gave a small, steady smile, his voice low. "There are things worth losing if it means saving your conscience." Maya's eyes flickered between trust and fear. She closed the box and pushed it toward him. "If you really want to know, listen to the second recording, but don't do this for me." When the door closed, the room was left with only him and the box. Sebastian powered up his computer and plugged in the drive. A woman's voice filled the room, young, clear, alive with passion. She spoke of a world where people could communicate through emotion, unbound by silence. He froze. That voice? It was Maya's. There was no longer any doubt. At that moment, a message from the hospital arrived, and the world seemed to stop. Eleanor had collapsed during a routine checkup. The tumor was benign, but dangerously placed. One wrong incision could leave her permanently off balance. Sebastian dropped everything and rushed to her side. Maya was already there. When Eleanor saw her, she signed, "I'm fine, just a little tired." Maya smiled, taking her hand. From that day, Maya stayed by her bedside, telling stories in sign, about odd customers, funny mishaps at the restaurant, small things that made Eleanor laugh. At one point, the older woman's trembling hands signed back. I'd forgotten what it felt like to laugh. And so the two women, one who had lost her hearing, the other who had lost her faith, began to heal each other through a language that needed no sound at all. Early one morning, Eleanor called her over and signed slowly, each movement deliberate and clear. "You don't have to keep hiding in silence. There are still people in this world who will listen to you." Maya looked at her, tears shimmering in her eyes. Her fingers trembled as she signed back. "I've been silent for so long. I'm afraid I've forgotten how to speak. Eleanor smiled gently, squeezing her hand. Then speak with your hands. In that moment, Maya felt her heart unlock. She realized that silence was no longer her shelter. It had become her cage. Eleanor's words were like a door flung open, and in that instant, Maya knew she was ready. When Eleanor was discharged from the hospital, Sebastian helped his mother walk out, keeping a steady pace beside Maya. No one spoke, but between the three of them existed a rare kind of peace, the kind that only comes after someone has finally faced their deepest fear. Late that night, Maya sat alone, the metal box resting on the table before her. She opened it, carefully organizing each page, each recording, every mark and symbol, a piece of the life she once buried. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady now. She whispered to herself, "It's time." Outside, the city was still loud, but for her, the world seemed to fall quiet. In that stillness, Maya relearned how to speak, not with words, but with her hands. And perhaps the truly deaf are not those who cannot hear, but those who choose not to hear the truth, even when it stands right in front of them. The next morning, at an emergency meeting at Hale Biotech, Sebastian stood and, in a low, steady voice, announced a decision that stunned the room. A decision he knew would change everything. When the meeting ended, the air at Hale Biotech felt as if a storm had just passed. Sebastian faced the board, straight-backed and unnervingly calm. He announced his decision: terminate all collaboration with Aaron Cade, retract the Sign Voice project, and publish the original documents proving the work belonged to Lena Moore, the researcher the academic world had assumed vanished. Some people in the room gasped, others were speechless. The CFO shouted that Sebastian had just burned tens of millions of dollars, that the stock would plunge, that investors would turn away. Sebastian simply replied, "I'd rather lose money than lose my soul." That morning, the news spread like wildfire. Hale Biotech cancels $80 million contract amid allegations of research theft. The media began digging through old records. The name Aaron Cade quickly became the center of investigation. Articles mentioned a once promising researcher who vanished mysteriously after a past scandal. With each new piece of evidence, the picture sharpened. Aaron had orchestrated everything: the falsified data, the forged legal documents, the lies that buried the truth. And in the middle of the storm, Maya disappeared. No one knew where she went. Sebastian searched everywhere: the restaurant, her small apartment in Queens, even asked Sarah, the manager. All he got were quiet shakes of the head, until he found it. A single folded note, left inside the same rusted metal box he'd seen before. "Thank you for believing me when no one else did, but my new life doesn't begin with revenge." No farewell, no trace, just a piece so gentle it hurt to read. He read the words again and again, until the ink blurred in his hands. Time moves slower when you don't know what you're waiting for. 2 months later, when the company's crisis had finally begun to settle, Sebastian still hadn't stopped thinking about Maya. One afternoon, he attended a small charity event hosted by Hands of Hope, an organization supporting children who are deaf and hard of hearing. As he stepped into the bright hall, he heard laughter, pure, ringing, the kind that fills the air like music. And then, amid the sunlight and sound, he saw her, Maya. Wearing a simple white blouse, her hair tied high, she stood before a group of children, teaching them to sign a song. Her face was serene, her eyes light and free, her smile so real it caught his breath. She was no longer the quiet waitress lost in the clatter of dishes, no longer the victim of a man's betrayal. She was herself again, someone who had found her voice in the silence. He walked closer, his heartbeat quickening like it had that very first night. When Maya noticed him, she paused, just slightly, then smiled. Sebastian's hands moved awkwardly, trembling a little as he signed. "I missed you." Maya laughed softly, her eyes warm. She signed back, gentle and teasing. "You signed it wrong." He laughed, unable to hide the emotion in his voice. "Because I only ever learned to speak for one person." Maya stilled for a moment, her eyes softening. Then she signed. "And does that person hear you?" Sebastian looked at her for a long time, a small tilted smile on his lips. "If she wants me to," he said quietly, "I'll spend my whole life learning to say it right." In that moment, everything in the room seemed to slow. Children's laughter echoed around them, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, wrapping the two of them in a fragile, golden warmth, gentle as forgiveness itself. Then Eleanor appeared, carrying a bouquet of bright yellow tulips. Maya ran to her, embracing her tightly. The older woman signed slowly, but with certainty. "I told you, didn't I?" There are still people in this world who will listen to you. The children rushed toward Maya, crowding around her as they began signing a little song together. Their tiny fingers moved in rhythm, part dance, part language, part magic. Sebastian and Eleanor stood a few steps back, watching her bathed in sunlight, surrounded by those small, fluttering hands that sang in perfect silence. When the song ended, Maya looked up. Her eyes met his. No words, no sound. Between them was a language with no alphabet, only trust and the quiet peace two souls find after walking through pain together. Outside, the spring wind drifted through the open windows, carrying the scent of yellow tulips and children's laughter. And Sebastian realized something. Justice didn't always live in courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it lived in the look of someone who had stopped being afraid, in the smile of a child learning to speak with their hands, and in a heart finally still enough to hear what had never been spoken. Maya turned to him, signing playfully. "You're still signing it wrong." He smiled, nodding. "Good. That means I have a reason to keep practicing." She shook her head, smiling softly, her eyes glistening. This wasn't a story that ended with fireworks or a triumphant fanfare. Just a pale, golden afternoon, a man, a woman, and a circle of children singing with their hands. In that moment, Maya understood. Sometimes the most beautiful languages don't need to be spoken aloud. They only need a heart quiet enough to listen. Life doesn't always need grand victories. Sometimes it only asks for one brave moment, the courage to face the truth and to choose kindness over resentment. Maya didn't seek revenge. She simply chose to live better. And Sebastian, in losing his reputation, found something far more valuable, a peaceful conscience. Maybe all of us, at some point, have wanted to fall silent with the world. But perhaps that silence is where we begin to hear the truest voice, the one that comes from within. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you found a small part of yourself in it, just enough to make you smile or to make you think a little differently about something. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more journeys that reach into the human heart, where every wound has the power to become light.